The air in the courtroom was thick and still, heavy with unspoken words and hushed anxieties. It was a sterile, formal space, all dark wood and cool, impersonal tones. I sat at the table beside my lawyer, Mr. Ellis, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles were white. My focus was locked on the judge, a woman with kind eyes but a firm set to her jaw. Every nerve ending felt raw, exposed. As a librarian, I found comfort in order, in the quiet certainty of books neatly arranged on shelves. This room felt like chaos given form, my life ripped from its binding and scattered across the floor. Across the aisle sat Ethan. He looked perfect. A crisp, dark suit, hair neatly styled, an expression of concerned composure. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was simply a devoted father fighting for his child. His lawyer, a woman named Ms. Thorne, was standing now, her voice calm, articulate, dismantling my life piece by piece with professional precision. She spoke of my alleged inconsistency, my emotional volatility, twisting ordinary disagreements or moments of stress into evidence of deep-seated flaws. Then came the part that stole my breath. Miss Thorne paused, adjusted her glasses, and looked directly at the judge. "Furthermore, Your Honor," she stated, her voice unwavering, "Mr. Hayes's primary concern stems from Ms. Hayes's documented history of severe emotional and mental instability. Episodes of paranoia and delusion have unfortunately required intervention by her own family in the past, a fact we believe the court must weigh heavily when considering her capacity for consistent, stable parenting." My mind reeled. Documented history? Paranoia? Delusion? Years of Ethan's gaslighting hit me all at once. The times he'd told me I was overreacting, imagining things, that my worries weren't real, that I was breaking down. Had he actually twisted that narrative into something formal, something presented as fact to the court? And the part about my family, my sister, Chloe, had he somehow convinced her? Was that why she hadn't spoken to me in so long? A cold dread washed over me, a feeling of utter powerlessness. I glanced at Ethan. His gaze met mine for just a fraction of a second. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips before his expression settled back into one of earnest concern. He looked triumphant, like the damage was done, like he had won without me even having a chance to defend myself against such a deeply personal, insidious lie. Mr. Ellis leaned in, his voice a low whisper. "Grace, do you want to address that specifically? About your family. How could I? How could I untangle years of manipulation, the deliberate destruction of my most important relationship, in this setting right now?" My throat felt tight, my voice would surely tremble. If I showed any emotion, it would confirm their narrative that I was unstable. I had to stay calm. I shook my head slightly, keeping my gaze fixed ahead. Mr. Ellis nodded, a brief acknowledgement of my silent decision. My strategy, his strategy, was to rely on facts, on documented evidence. But how do you present evidence against a carefully constructed lie about your internal state and private family matters? Miss Thorne continued speaking, her voice smooth and confident. The lie hung in the air, taking root. I focused on my breathing, trying to slow my pounding heart. I would not cry. I would not give them that satisfaction. I was not unstable. I was a mother fighting for her child, a woman who had survived years of subtle abuse that was anything but delusional. Just as the moment seemed to solidify, just as Miss Thorne was about to move on to her next point, there was a subtle stir in the public benches behind us. A rustle, a muffled sound, and then a voice clear and steady, cutting through the courtroom's hushed tension. "Excuse me, Your Honor. I believe there's been a significant misrepresentation of fact." Every head turned, including the judge's. Her eyebrows went up, a look of surprise on her face. Ethan, across from me, stiffened. Miss Thorne paused, turning towards the sound, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. My own heart leaped into my throat. That voice, it was unmistakable. I turned slowly, following the gaze of everyone else in the room. Standing in the back row, her presence commanding despite the simple act of standing, was my sister, Chloe. Before Ethan, my world had a quiet, predictable rhythm, much like the Dewey Decimal System I use daily. My job as a librarian wasn't just work. It was a sanctuary. I loved the smell of old paper, the hushed reverence of the reading room, the certainty of information organized and accessible. I found comfort in stories contained neatly within covers. It was a stark contrast to the chaos my life would become. My closest relationship was with my sister, Chloe. She was the opposite of me in many ways. More outgoing, assertive, with a sharp mind and a natural skepticism that I sometimes envied. Chloe was the one I went to with everything, the one who knew my fears before I even voiced them. Our bond felt unbreakable, built on years of shared history, inside jokes, and unwavering support. I met Ethan at a small community project renovating a local historical library annex. He was charming, effortlessly charismatic, talking passionately about preserving history and community spaces. He seemed to genuinely appreciate my quiet dedication, my love for books and order. He wasn't loud or demanding. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel truly seen. He felt like a safe harbor in a world that sometimes felt overwhelming. The romance was swift and intense. He swept me off my feet with gestures that seemed incredibly thoughtful, bringing me obscure books he found, remembering tiny details about my day, praising my gentle nature. He seemed so stable, so confident. He was everything I thought I wanted. We married within a year, bought a cozy little house in the suburbs, and 3 years later, our son Leo was born. The joy of becoming a mother was immense, a love so pure it felt sacred. I thought my life was finally perfect, a beautiful, complete story. But slowly, subtly, the narrative began to shift. It started with small things. Criticisms disguised as concern about my parenting. Are you sure Leo should be playing outside alone? The neighbors might think. Gentle corrections about how I managed the household budget. Maybe you should let me handle the finances, dear. You seem a bit scattered. He'd question my judgment on minor things, always with that calm, reasonable tone, suggesting I was too emotional or overthinking things. Then came the gaslighting. He'd deny things he'd clearly said. I never promised that, you're remembering it wrong, Grace. Twist past events to make me seem irrational. You got so worked up about that little thing, remember? It wasn't a big deal, you're just prone to exaggerating. Or dismiss my feelings entirely. Why are you crying? You're being dramatic. That didn't happen the way you think it did. You're being paranoid. Slowly, insidiously, he chipped away at my confidence, making me question my memory, my perceptions, my very sanity. The order in my life began to crumble, replaced by a constant, low-level anxiety. Ethan's most calculated tactic was isolating me. He knew my bond with Chloe was my strongest anchor, so he set out to sever it. He worked on both of us, weaving a narrative of distrust. To me, he'd present himself as the concerned husband, subtly criticizing Chloe. He'd say she was too negative, that she didn't understand our marriage, that she was stirring up trouble. Then he started showing me proof. Carefully edited text messages or fragments of conversations that made Chloe seem critical, judgmental, or dismissive of my feelings. He'd say things like, I talked to Chloe, she's really worried about you, Grace. She thinks you're becoming unstable. We both just want you to get help. He twisted her genuine concern, if she had any, based on his lies to her, into a weapon, fabricating the idea that she believed I was having breakdowns and that they needed to intervene. Simultaneously, I know now, he was feeding Chloe lies about me. He'd tell her I was acting irrationally, making baseless accusations against him, that I was paranoid and pushing everyone away. He positioned himself as the calm, worried husband trying to cope with my supposed instability. It worked. The carefully crafted misinformation, delivered with his convincing calm and paired with my own rising self-doubt, drove a wedge between us. I stopped calling Chloe as often. When she tried to reach out, I was distant, interpreting her attempts through the lens of Ethan's lies, seeing concern where there was love, suspicion where there was confusion. I remember one painful phone call, tense and full of unspoken accusations on my part, fueled by his manipulation, after which we just stopped talking. The silence stretched for 2 years. It felt like a physical ache in my chest, the loss of the one person who knew me best. I believed Ethan had convinced even her that I was the problem. It wasn't just Chloe. Friends seemed to drift away. The their initial concern overridden by Ethan's smooth reassurances or the subtle rumors he spread. I remember feeling an awkward distance from a friend, Olivia, at a park playdate, later realizing Ethan had probably told her some version of his Grace's struggling story. My world shrunk to the four walls of my house, my days filled with anxiety, walking on eggshells, constantly bracing myself for the next criticism or gaslighting comment. My identity, once so clearly defined by my work and my relationships, was dissolving under the constant pressure. Life became a performance. I learned to regulate my expressions, to keep my voice level, to suppress any hint of emotion that Ethan could label as hysterical or delusional. The quiet order I loved in the library was replaced by a suffocating, unpredictable chaos at home. My son Leo, who should have been the brightest part of my life, was growing up in an atmosphere of tension and control. I watched him, a sensitive, bright child, becoming quieter, sometimes mimicking Ethan's dismissive tone or showing signs of anxiety. That hurt more than anything Ethan did to me. The breaking point didn't come from a single argument, but from seeing the toxic environment through Leo's eyes. One evening, Ethan was coolly criticizing me over something trivial, how I'd loaded the dishwasher, perhaps, but using the familiar language of my supposed incompetence and instability. Leo, who was playing quietly nearby, looked up, his little face etched with confusion and fear. Ethan turned to him, putting on a gentle smile, and said something horrifyingly casual like, "Don't worry, buddy. Mommy just gets a little mixed up sometimes. We need to be patient with her." The casual cruelty of it, the way he normalized his abuse and painted me as inherently flawed to my son, shattered something inside me. Seeing Leo's scared, confused eyes, I realized I couldn't protect him by staying quiet, by trying to appease Ethan. I was teaching Leo that this was acceptable, that it was my fault. In that moment, the immense fear I had of leaving Ethan was eclipsed by the fierce, protective instinct of motherhood. I had to get us out. For Leo. That night, while Ethan was out, I packed 2 bags, one for me, one for Leo. Essentials only. My hands trembled, but my resolve was steel. I called my friend Olivia, the one I'd felt distant from. I stammered out a fraction of what was happening, enough for her to understand it was serious. Without hesitation, she offered her spare room. It wasn't a long-term solution, but it was a place to breathe, a place to think, away from the immediate threat and confusion of home. I strapped Leo into the car seat, drove away from the house that had become a prison, and felt an overwhelming mix of terror and exhilaration. I was free, but utterly vulnerable. I expected Ethan to call, to beg, to try and manipulate me into coming back. Instead, he went straight to war. Within days, I was served with divorce papers and a petition for sole custody. His legal filings painted me as unstable, neglectful, and incapable of providing a safe home for Leo. He used every lie he had carefully constructed over the years, presenting them as fact. And, of course, he included the claim about my family, about my sister, using the distance he created as proof of my supposed instability. So here I was in this courtroom, listening to his lawyer articulate those carefully crafted lies, twisting them into formal accusations. My lawyer, Mr. Ellis, was competent and kind, guiding me through the bewildering legal process. But even he couldn't prepare me for the cold efficiency with which they dismantled my character, using the very doubts Ethan had sown in my mind as their primary weapons. And then, in the midst of that carefully controlled environment, Chloe's voice. The moment Chloe's voice rang out across the courtroom, time seemed to stretch and warp. It had been 2 years, 2 long silent years, since I'd heard her speak, and yet her voice was instantly recognizable, clear, steady, with an underlying current of determination that I knew well. The courtroom stirred. Heads swiveled. The judge's surprise was evident. Ethan, across the aisle, looked like he'd been physically struck. "Excuse me," the judge said, her voice firm but curious, looking towards the back. "Who are you?" Chloe stepped forward from the back row. She wasn't dressed like someone expecting to sit quietly and observe. She wore a dark blazer, her posture straight, her expression resolute. She looked like she was there on serious business. "I am Chloe Hayes, Your Honor. I am Grace Hayes' sister." Miss Thorne visibly stiffened, whispering something urgently to Ethan, whose face had gone pale. "She is not on the witness list, Your Honor," Ms. Thorne stated, attempting to regain control of the situation. Chloe addressed the judge again, her voice calm but carrying through the silent room. "I understand that, Your Honor. However, a statement was just made regarding my sister's history and my alleged involvement that is factually incorrect and highly relevant to these proceedings. I believe I need to correct the record." The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. "Approach the stand," she instructed, allowing Chloe to bypass the normal procedure, recognizing the serious nature of the false claim that had just been introduced. Chloe walked forward with a composure that amazed me. She moved past the rows of seats, past the attorneys' tables, and approached the area near the judge's bench. My heart hammered against my ribs. I still couldn't fully grasp why she was here after so long. Was she really here to help me? Or had Ethan somehow twisted things even further? The years of painful silence, of believing she had sided with him, made it hard to trust what was happening. Chloe stood before the judge. She took a deep breath, looked the judge in the eye, and began speaking. Her voice was steady, leaving no room for doubt. "Your Honor, the claim that my sister, Grace Hayes, has a history of mental breakdowns requiring family intervention, or that I or any other family member has ever sought legal action or intervention against her for that reason, is completely and utterly false. It is a lie." Miss Thorne immediately jumped up. "Objection. Your Honor, this is irrelevant speculation based on." "Denied," the judge said, holding up a hand to silence Miss Thorne. She looked intently at Chloe. "You may continue." Chloe looked briefly at me, and in her eyes, I saw not judgment or confirmation of Ethan's lies, but a deep, aching sadness and regret. Then she turned back to the judge. "My sister and I," Chloe explained, her voice gaining strength, "became estranged about 2 years ago. Not because of any instability on Grace's part. We stopped speaking because we were both systematically manipulated and isolated from each other by Ethan. He deliberately fed us both lies about the other person. He showed Grace twisted communications and told her things that made her believe I thought she was delusional and needed intervention. At the same time, he was telling me that Grace was acting irrationally, pushing everyone away, and making false accusations against him. He created a narrative that made me question her well-being and her actions, always positioning himself as the reasonable, concerned party." She paused, her gaze sweeping briefly towards Ethan, who was now staring straight ahead, his jaw tight. "I regret, more than words can say," Chloe continued, her voice thick with emotion, "that I believed him. I allowed myself to be used as a tool in his control over Grace. I should have spoken to her directly, questioned his narrative. I cut contact based on a false reality that Ethan created." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on Chloe. Ethan remained frozen, his face unreadable, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. "There was no family intervention," Chloe stated again firmly. "There were no breakdowns requiring it. There is no restraining order, no legal action I have ever taken against my sister. The distance between us was the result of calculated, emotional manipulation designed to isolate Grace from her support system." She looked at Grace again, her eyes filled with a raw apology that spanned 2 years of silence. "Grace," she said, her voice softer now, "I am so sorry. I should have fought harder for the truth. I am here now, and I want to help make this right." Miss Thorne, recovering slightly, attempted to pivot. "Your Honor, while my client was genuinely concerned about Ms. Hayes and may have misinterpreted or deliberately misrepresented, counsel," the judge interrupted sharply, her tone leaving no room for ambiguity. She looked at Ms. Thorne, then at Ethan. "The court takes false claims made during proceedings very seriously, especially those designed to undermine a party's fitness as a parent." Ethan's composure cracked. He looked visibly panicked, darting a glance at Ms. Thorne, who offered no help. In that moment, watching the carefully constructed facade crumble, I understood the depth of his need for control and how reliant he was on sowing doubt and isolation. Chloe had just shattered his primary weapon in front of everyone. "Ms. Hayes," the judge said to Chloe, her voice now firm, "do you have anything further to add regarding this specific matter?" Chloe nodded. "Just one thing, Your Honor. For the record, I trust my sister implicitly. I believe she is a good, capable, loving mother. And I regret any way in which my actions, or my believing of lies, may have caused doubt about that. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt truly seen. Not just legally defended, but understood, validated. The truth, in the form of the person I thought I had lost forever, had just walked into the room and spoken with undeniable clarity. The judge remained silent for a long moment after Chloe finished speaking, her gaze moving between Ethan, Ms. Thorne, and me. She made notes, her pen scratching faintly in the quiet room. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of authority, and it was directed squarely at Ethan. "Mr. Hayes," the judge stated, her tone sharp now, cutting through the lingering tension. "Did you personally provide the information to your legal team suggesting Ms. Hayes had a history of breakdowns requiring family intervention, and specifically that her sister had taken action?" Ethan shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of his earlier composure. "That was my understanding, Your Honor," he stammered, avoiding eye contact. "At the time, your understanding," the judge repeated flatly. "Or a deliberate fabrication presented to influence the court?" He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, heavy and accusing. His gaze flickered to Ms. Thorne, a silent plea for help, but she remained still, her face unreadable. He exhaled slowly through his nose, a clear attempt to recalibrate his strategy. "I was under the impression that there had been past difficulties, Your Honor," Ethan finally said, his voice smoother now, trying to minimize the lie. "I didn't intend to mislead the court." Chloe stepped forward slightly again, her voice still clear and strong. "Your Honor, if I may clarify, Ethan contacted me during the initial stages of this case. He explicitly hinted that if I didn't corroborate his claims regarding Grace's instability, he would introduce private information about my life, including my partner and my profession, to discredit me. He wasn't seeking clarification or expressing concern. He was attempting to coerce me into supporting his false narrative. When I refused, he ceased all contact. This demonstrates a pattern of using threats and private information to control anyone who doesn't align with his version of events." The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken. The focus had completely shifted from me to him. For the first time, the spotlight of suspicion was entirely on Ethan Hayes, the man who had so carefully crafted an image of himself as the wronged, concerned father. Mr. Ellis stood up beside me, his expression grim but resolute. "Your Honor," he stated, his voice firm. "Given the demonstrated pattern of dishonesty, the false claims made to this court, and the attempted coercion of potential witnesses, we formally request that all prior statements and documentation submitted by Mr. Hayes and his counsel be thoroughly reevaluated for accuracy and intent. Ms. Hayes's credibility has been unjustly attacked through deliberate falsehoods." The judge nodded slowly, her expression stern. "The court finds Mr. Hayes's statements regarding Ms. Hayes's history and her sister's alleged actions to be unsubstantiated and contradicted by credible testimony," she announced. "This raises serious concerns about Mr. Hayes's candor with the court. I will be issuing a formal inquiry into this matter. Furthermore, we will proceed with the understanding that Ms. Hayes's credibility has been unfairly targeted. Any future claims made by Mr. Hayes regarding Ms. Hayes's character or mental state will require substantial, verified evidence." Ethan did not speak again for the remainder of the hearing. He didn't need to. His own actions, his own lies, had spoken volumes and done far more damage to his case than anything I could have said or done in that moment. When the judge called for a brief recess before issuing temporary orders, I stayed seated for a few seconds, processing the seismic shift that had just occurred. It felt surreal. Then, Chloe was kneeling beside my chair, her hand on my arm. "I wanted to come sooner," she said, her voice low and rough with emotion. "I felt like I was going crazy trying to understand what was happening, trying to find you. I saw some things. I started digging. When I heard about the court date, I knew I had to be here. I let him turn me into a weapon against you, Grace, and I hate that I let that happen." I nodded, tears finally stinging my eyes, but I held them back. "Thank you," I whispered, the words inadequate for the depth of my gratitude. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for speaking." "I won't disappear again," she promised, squeezing my arm. "You're not alone anymore." Later, when the court resumed, the judge delivered the temporary custody ruling. "This court finds no compelling evidence to suggest Ms. Hayes is an unfit or unstable parent," she stated, her gaze briefly sweeping over Ethan. "Based on the information presented and the serious credibility issues raised today concerning Mr. Hayes' testimony, temporary custody will be shared, with Ms. Hayes designated as the primary residential parent. All exchanges of the child will be supervised by a court-appointed third party for a minimum of 90 days. Both parties will undergo comprehensive psychological and character evaluations. A final custody determination will be made after these evaluations are completed and further evidence is presented." I couldn't believe it. After months of living in fear, of being gaslighted into doubting my own sanity, of facing vicious and false accusations, the truth had broken through. The judge had seen through Ethan's performance, his lies laid bare. As I gathered my things, a small crayon drawing Leo had made slipped from my folder, a picture of the three of us, him, me, and a slightly lopsided dog he dreamt of owning someday. I picked it up, clutching it tight. For the first time in years, my heart felt steady, filled not with anxiety, but with a quiet sense of hope. Ethan walked past our table without making eye contact. His shoulders were slumped, the polished veneer gone. For once, there was no smirk, no subtle jab. He just left. Chloe waited for me at the exit. Stepping outside into the bright sunlight felt like walking out of a long, dark tunnel. Chloe walked beside me, silent but present. That quiet presence meant everything. In the courtroom, my name was on the documents, my reputation on the line. But it wasn't just my story in there. It was the story of every woman who has been told she's too emotional, crazy, or making things up by a manipulative partner. Every mother who has been accused of instability because she dared to stand up to control. Every sister whose bond was targeted and broken by deceit. Chloe's voice that day didn't just change the course of a legal battle, it changed something fundamental inside me. It turned the tide, affirming my reality and my strength. The version of me that Ethan tried to erase, the one buried under layers of doubt and isolation, stood up again. Stronger, clearer, and finally, no longer alone. After the hearing, I didn't collapse into tears right away. I thought I would, but I felt oddly calm, like I was still holding my breath, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the fragile sense of relief to shatter. But it didn't. That night, I sat on the floor of Leo's room while he played, lining up his toy cars in a colorful parade. He looked up at me, his eyes bright, and asked if I would help him build a ramp out of blocks. I did. We didn't talk about court or daddy or anything heavy. We just played, building and knocking down towers. In the middle of it, he stopped, looked at me, and said, "Mommy, you seem happy again." That simple sentence from my son, the one who had unknowingly been the catalyst for my escape, broke something open inside me. The dam of suppressed emotion finally broke. I pulled him into a tight hug, burying my face in his hair, whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," over and over, the tears finally falling hot and fast. He didn't understand why I was thanking him, but he hugged me back fiercely. In the weeks and months that followed, the custody case continued. The psychological evaluations confirmed what Chloe and I already knew, patterns of controlling, manipulative behavior in Ethan. Evidence emerged supporting Chloe's claim of his attempted coercion. The truth, once given a voice in that courtroom, continued to build its own undeniable record. Eventually, the judge made her final ruling. I was awarded primary custody of Leo. Ethan was granted supervised visitation, contingent on attending court-ordered therapy and parenting classes focused on his manipulative behaviors. It wasn't a triumphant victory march. It was the quiet, determined reclaiming of a life. It was about creating a safe, peaceful home for my son, where he could grow up without the constant tension and confusion. It was about being able to parent without fear, to breathe without walking on eggshells. Rebuilding my relationship with Chloe was also a process. We met for coffee the week after court. There was awkwardness at first, 2 years of silence and hurt sitting between us. But beneath it was the unbreakable bond of sisterhood. We talked, raw and honest. She apologized for believing Ethan's lies, for not reaching out. I apologized for shutting her out, for letting his manipulation isolate me so completely. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't instantly healed, but we committed to the effort. Sisters, even when pulled apart by the darkest of manipulations, can find their way back to each other. If you had told me a few years ago that I would stand in court, accused of being delusional by the man who promised to love me, and that my estranged sister would be the one to step in and bring the truth to light, I wouldn't have believed you. Life surprises you, often when you least expect it. Here's what I've learned. Silence in the face of lies is not weakness. Sometimes, choosing not to immediately defend yourself means you are waiting for the truth to arrive, whether it comes from within you or from someone standing beside you. I didn't win that day in court by shouting louder or fighting dirtier. I won because I stood in my truth, even when it felt fragile. I waited, and the lies, built on shaky ground, eventually collapsed under their own weight when confronted by simple, unwavering truth. If you're watching this and someone has tried to make you feel small, unworthy, or like your voice doesn't matter, I want you to know something. The truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. It only needs a moment and a willingness to stand in it. Sometimes that moment comes from someone else. Sometimes it has to come from inside you. But it will come. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living. I'm raising my son in a peaceful home. I'm rebuilding a cherished relationship with my sister. And I am remembering piece by piece who I was before someone tried to convince me I was someone else entirely. That courtroom tried to decide who I was based on lies. But in the end, I decided for myself. Thank you for watching my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt unheard, misjudged, or like someone tried to rewrite your truth, please know you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is hold onto your truth and wait for the moment it can finally be heard. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video, sharing it with someone who might need to hear it, and leaving a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or even just a simple, "I'm still standing." And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more real stories about finding strength, healing, and rising again. There's more to come. Take care of yourself, and remember, your truth has value always.